For generations, the border between the United States and Canada has stood as the world's longest undefended boundary, a symbol of peace. The Alaska Highway, winding through British Columbia and the Yukon, was more than a road. It was a lifeline built on trust and shared purpose. Built during World War II as a joint effort, it connected Alaskans to the continent and Canadians to opportunity. Families, truckers, and communities on both sides relied on the seamless flow of goods and people. Crossing the border was routine, friendly, and often felt like a handshake rather than a checkpoint. Nationality mattered less than the shared identity of being Northerners, united by the land's challenges and beauty. The highway's open road was the bedrock of the region's economy and social fabric. The idea of a hard border seemed unimaginable until recently. Now, that peace is fraying. The once open road is threatened, and the assumptions that shaped life here for decades are under siege. The Alaska Highway, once a symbol of unity, is now a point of contention. Border crossings are tinged with tension and uncertainty. What was once a simple drive is now complicated and costly. The long, undefended friendship faces its greatest test, with Alaskans on the front lines of change. Trouble began quietly in early 2024, when British Columbia announced steep tolls on U.S. registered commercial vehicles using the Alaska Highway. The official reason, American trucks, they said, caused heavy wear, and Canadian taxpayers had been subsidizing Alaska's supply chain for years. But many saw the tolls as retaliation for new U.S. tariffs on Canadian goods. The Alaska Highway is Alaska's only practical land route, making the tolls a powerful bargaining chip. Electronic gantries went up and U.S. trucks now needed transponders, with fees adding thousands to each round trip. For Alaska, this was a direct hit. The policy targeted only commercial traffic to and from Alaska, making its intent clear. The once open road now had a price tag. This marked a dramatic shift. Canada, usually diplomatic, was now taking assertive, localized action. The toll gate became a symbol of a new era, one defined by economic friction and strategic maneuvering. The move showed provinces could act independently, with national consequences. For Alaskans, the message was clear: the era of easy passage was over. The Alaska Highway, once a bridge, now felt like a choke point. The tolls signaled the end of an era and the start of a more complicated chapter in U.S. Canada relations. The impact was immediate, and the shockwaves were felt far beyond the border. The open road had become a battleground for economic leverage. The toll gate on the tundra was more than a fee, it was a warning. The relationship between neighbors was changing, fast. The border, once invisible, was now impossible to ignore. Alaska's lifeline had become a pressure point. The world was watching to see what would happen next. The economic shock in Alaska was swift and severe. Every item trucked in, from groceries to construction materials, now carried a new, hefty cost. Prices on store shelves climbed almost overnight, squeezing families already burdened by Alaska's high cost of living. Seniors and low-wage workers felt the pinch most, as essentials became less affordable. Businesses faced uncertainty. Some small trucking companies closed, while larger ones scrambled to adapt. Construction slowed, jobs were threatened, and the dream of starting a business seemed out of reach. The border's atmosphere changed. Crossings became tense, and casual trips for vacations or family visits dwindled. The psychological shift was profound. The border felt less like a bridge, more like a wall. The business community tried to adapt, but the fundamental problem remained. Alaska's cost of doing business had changed for good. Owners felt trapped between two governments, their livelihoods at stake. The price of passage was measured not just in dollars, but in lost jobs and a growing sense of isolation. The tolls fractured the region's sense of community. The once seamless flow of goods and people was gone. Alaska was left to face the consequences, alone. The tolls sparked fierce debate within Alaska, splitting the state into opposing camps. Some blamed Canada, calling the tolls an act of economic aggression and demanding U.S. retaliation. Small business owners and truckers, hit hardest, saw their livelihoods threatened and called for a hard line. Others pointed to Washington, arguing that U.S. tariffs provoked Canada's response and that Alaska was collateral damage in a national trade war. Economists and free trade advocates urged diplomacy and a de-escalation of tensions. The debate was personal, touching on identity, livelihoods, and Alaska's future. Communities were divided, friends and neighbors found themselves on opposite sides. The media reflected this split, with stories alternating between blaming Canada and criticizing U.S. policy. The lack of consensus made it hard for Alaska to present a united front. Editorials and talk radio were filled with frustration and uncertainty. The crisis was complex, with no easy answers or clear villains. Alaskans were caught in the middle, trying to make sense of a world reshaped by forces beyond their control. The state was a house divided, struggling to find common ground. The debate raged on, but solutions remained elusive. The tolls had done more than raise prices. They had fractured Alaska's sense of unity. The state's future felt more uncertain than ever. Faced with crisis, Alaskans turned to what they know best: self-reliance. Maritime shipping surged as companies sought to bypass the tolls, turning the port of Alaska into a vital hub. Logistics firms innovated, and new jobs sprang up at the port and in related industries. A buy local movement gained momentum, with farmers markets and small manufacturers thriving. Communities organized bulk buying clubs and shared resources, reviving traditional skills like gardening and canning. The state government invested in port upgrades and offered workshops to help businesses adapt. Alaskans refused to be defeated, forging a stronger sense of community and resilience. The crisis became a catalyst for innovation and local pride. While politics stalled, Alaskans got to work, one container ship and one local purchase at a time. The spirit of adaptation was alive and well in the north. As Alaskans adapted, the situation escalated. Inspired by BC, the Yukon imposed its own fees on U.S. trucks, and other provinces considered similar measures. The land bridge to Alaska grew more expensive and complicated each month. What began as a dispute with one province now looked like a coordinated Canadian stance. Nationalistic rhetoric rose, and Ottawa, while calling for calm, did little to intervene. The burden fell squarely on Alaska, deepening its sense of isolation. The easy flow of people, goods, and ideas slowed. Scientific collaborations, tourism, and cultural exchanges suffered. Resentment grew on both sides of the border. The dispute was no longer just about tolls, it was eroding generations of goodwill. The continental divide was now an economic and emotional reality. Alaska felt stranded, a pawn in a larger geopolitical game. The rift between neighbors was wider than ever. The crisis reignited talk of Alaskan independence. Once a fringe idea, secession now entered mainstream debate as frustration with Washington grew. Many Alaskans felt abandoned, their interests sacrificed in a national trade war. Independence was reframed as economic survival, free to negotiate its own trade deals and protect its supply lines. The state's vast resources fueled arguments that Alaska could stand alone. The independence movement gained traction in public discourse, with Alaskexit debated on radio and online. Pressure mounted on state leaders, but their power was limited. The sense of powerlessness only made radical solutions more appealing. While secession remained unlikely, the conversation revealed the depth of Alaska's anger and alienation. The distant drum of independence beat louder than it had in generations. As of July 2025, the standoff continues. Tolls remain, costs rise, and maritime shipping only partially fills the gap left by the highway. The state stands at a crossroads, its future uncertain. U.S. and Canadian governments talk, but progress is slow. Business leaders and citizens on both sides push for renewed cooperation, hoping shared economic pain will force compromise. Possible futures range from worsening trade war and isolation to a diplomatic breakthrough restoring the highway's role as a symbol of unity. Most likely, Alaska will emerge with a more diversified supply chain and a changed relationship with Canada. The crisis has forced Alaskans to confront their vulnerabilities and rethink their place in the world. The Alaska Highway Showdown is a wake-up call. The open road, once a symbol of friendship, now reveals the fragility of cooperation. Life in the north has been fundamentally changed. The border's meaning has shifted, no longer invisible, but a daily reality. The next chapter for Alaska, and its friendship with Canada, remains unwritten.